Hello, I'm Paul Melrose, Assisting Pastor for Pastoral Care here at First United Methodist Church of Madison. You'll notice the different surroundings today. I'm in my office today, as I'm doing sparingly right now, doing some work from here. A couple of things on my mind today. I don't know why, but with all of the damage, the hurt, the discovery of pain that's much more open, with racism being brought out into the open, with the extreme sacrifices people make and risks they take to go to work in order that many lives might be saved and cared for, the way that our resources don't fully support our people in terms of hunger and clothing and housing. I've been thinking of that term often used in war, collateral damage. It sort of describes in some ways what life is like today. Is it too strong a word? But I don't know. There's been a lot of collateral damage from this disease. Part of it is I'm not here in my office anymore. I only come in infrequently. So my workspace, the immediacy of my supplies, the staff down the hall to talk with, the sanctuary to walk into to plan for worship or to spend a moment in private, these are all taken away. The collateral damage has been the experiences that I've lost, if you will. The chapel where we used to pray as a staff is no longer available. Do you get the picture? There are many ways that this speaks to me. I work from home. While that's convenient, that disrupts processes there. Our living room and our study areas are now turned around into recording studios and moving phones into back rooms so we may make confidential phone calls. I suppose another way to think about it is the amount of loss. A friend of mine who's a psychiatrist was telling me on the phone the other day that he's now closing down his private office. There's no reason for it. He can't use it. He can't see clients there because it doesn't allow for physical distance. Most client contacts for mental health and other healthcare reasons now are through telehealth. We Zoom with them. But there's kind of a wounding in that because the face-to-face meeting is over. What other things might there have been lost? Well, Fred and I used to have breakfast once a month, and he and his wife and me and my wife would have dinner 3 or 4 times a year. We Zoom now, or we might be thinking if we can find a space outside big enough and safe enough to do a dinner at a distance. It takes time to cope with this collateral damage, but I'm only talking about some of the obvious stuff that occurs to me as if you will, a person of privilege. Think of the other collateral damage that's been going on for so long that's now surfacing. As the pandemic surges, the stark realities of the cruelty of the disease as it ravages people of color, their communities, their lives, the double ways they put themselves out in work that they do, which oftentimes is of a much more traveling to kind of a situation. Stark realities that go on. They're not only in their homes and communities, but because sometimes they're just treated differently. The way we're discovering that redlining and other policies created communities of color with little services available. Collateral damage or head-on damage. One author I've read a long time ago, William Bridges, in a book about transitions, he talked about something called the neutral zone. It's a time when that which we know is coming to an end, we have no idea where we're going. It feels crazy to move ahead, and we're just in a neutral kind of no person's place. So the schools and educational institutions that used to know how to plan a school year, how to plan a curriculum, all that is now up in the air because of safety, because of health of families and teachers and students. The sapping of the educational process as we know it, and yet the need to move ahead so that lives can be safe, jobs can be safeguarded. It's not just lives or the economy, it's a weaving of both, and the pandemic, the way it hits our educational field, kind of speaks to that. And so in the no person's land, in this neutral zone, what's the best way forward to preserve life and safety and economy? It's as if this in-between place is in the meantime, where we are headed, where we have ended. It's time that has to be taken in this neutral zone. We just can't rush it. Even when we sit down here at the church for staff meetings, sometimes things have changed. In Madison for several days running, as in other cities, there were new protests which caused numerous, not only acts of bitterness, but also important statements on the part of marginalized people. This is what we want, this is what we need, and so our eyes are opened in the midst of chaos and confusion. We're unsure where we're headed. This time needs to be taken slowly and carefully, and yet deliberately, to discern what's the best way ahead. In our faith context, we talk about this a lot, perhaps thinking of an analogy of the neutral zone to be the Hebrew folk as they journeyed from Egypt to Israel. 40 years, a long time. They arrived as a changed people, a new beginning. It looked different. One of my go-to scriptures, as you have heard me refer to in many of these devotions, is the 23rd Psalm. Even though I go through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. I am comforted by that. I dwell in the house of the Lord, and yet maybe God has not yet shown me, nor is it clear where it is we are headed. But there's also a place for the groaning that Romans talks about. This is not easy, Lord. This is hard. This is scary. This is agony-provoking. And if it's that way for me as a person of privilege, imagine for folks who have less than we have, who have lived life in their ways so fully with minimal resources compared to what we've got. There's no justice in that, and yet they have moved ahead. But how much more they groan sometimes. But the groaning is true for all of us. 3 lines from Paul letters that Joe Agnes sent in a devotion that he posted on Facebook recently go like this. In Romans 8, we know that the whole creation has been groaning. It says in 8:22. We ourselves groan inwardly, Paul says in the next verse. The Spirit intercedes for us through wordless groans. 8:26. Paul speaks in his writings of women groaning in childbirth. He knows struggle and pain precede new life. Jesus used the same metaphor when he spoke of the beloved community to some. Some say we don't groan if we are strong and faithful, and yet Joe and I too and others would disagree. I have heard, Joe says, the mightiest and most devoted people groan. We learn this when we really listen to them. If I take time, he says, I can hear the groans of plants and animals and mountains, hills, stars, and seas. They don't want to be commodified, exploited, or destroyed by the climate. They are done with arguments that lead, unless they are, these arguments are arguments that lead to the restoration of our common garden. When I stop being busy, I hear my own groans. Sometimes I wonder if I stay engrossed in doing so much that I won't notice my groans. But, and this is an interesting thing to consider, groans are wonderful gifts. They help us acknowledge our pain. They see our longing to live in life-giving ways. When we deny that we have anything to groan about, it's then the Spirit that groans for us as a reminder, as an enabler, as a helper. The Spirit intercedes and invites us to claim our groans as signs of our experience of brokenness. It's real, but not ultimate. There's a lot of groaning going on. Yes, listen to it. And then we think our groaning will cease when we get back to normal. And then I found on Facebook this thought about normal. Normal is in the past. One person was watching the Today Show a couple mornings ago, and they were promoting Jimmy Fallon's return to his set. Fallon was talking about how things were feeling normal, how any small touches of what he knew being back in his stage area, even without an audience, with few stage hands, it still felt comforting. It struck him as normal, and he was also meaning what used to be. Normal is looking back to that which had become comfortable. Normal for Lot's wife was back in Sodom. Normal for the Hebrews in the wilderness was back in Egypt. Normal, or the exiled Hebrews, was back in the Jerusalem temple. Normal for us was pre-9/11, pre-COVID. Isn't it interesting that normal is always behind us? Maybe a better understanding of normal is something I referred to in a sermon recently, a quote from Brene Brown. We will not really go back to normal, she says. Normal really never was. Our pre-corona existence was not normal, other than we normalized greed, inequity, exhaustion, depletion, extraction, disconnection, confusion, rage, hoarding, hate, and lack. We should not long to return, my friends. We are being given the opportunity to stitch a new garment, she says, one that fits all of humanity and nature. And so we are led into the future. Less time spent in the office means more time online, doing other things. All of humanity and nature are more fully before us now. We see more openly and more honestly and more directly the cruelties of racism down through the years, the destructiveness that we oftentimes see exercised in the lives of so many. Cruelty, criticizing people who wear masks, looking for my right to be without a mask, not taking into consideration the health and safety of others. And yet, even when we are polarized, it's a way for us to see the path that God wishes for us to travel, to become one, to create the beloved community that all of the beautiful people that God has made may walk. Masks will no longer divide us, be the symbol of our unity and our love for each other. The new garment that fits all of humanity and nature is closer, but we're not there yet. We're not alone in this. We're not siloed because there are so many others that feel alone and siloed. So that experience is common. And we find ways through the media, through our worship, through our devotions, through reading, through phone calling, through opening our eyes to the new ways that we're brought together and see the common humanity of us all. Through the ministry of our church, our mission is to stitch as much as we can this new garment, the promise of God's beloved community, more together, even here and now. Thanks be to God for this challenge and this road to love, justice, and peace this day. Amen.